Hello, Internet, and thank you very much for tuning into the Cloud Native FM podcast, a channel where we love Kubernetes, but we want it to be invisible. Thanks for tuning in to episode 130. My name is Saim Safdar, host of Cloud Native FM. In this episode, we are joined by Ravi, Lackman, head of product education at Harness, on the challenges of navigating complex ecosystem, emerging software engineering trends and DevOps, challenges on managing on-prem Kubernetes, discuss Backstage and how Harness leveraging or contributing to Backstage within the ecosystem. And Ravi mentioned that Harness is introducing a new incident response module to help companies manage incident more effectively. Also, during the episode, we discuss the importance of balancing solution and AI trust, AI workload and Kubernetes use cases, and some of the conference where Ravi will be speaking this year.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be talking on the podcast, and yeah, really excited to get to talk to your guests. And so I'm Ravi. I'm head of product education at Harness. Been at Harness for about 5 years now, and yeah, my background was in early on was in distributed systems, and then it kind of moved into platform engineering, and now I'm in education. So kind of a 360 view of like what I've been doing the last parts of my career, but really excited to be here and talking to you and your guest.
Much for your intro, and I think it's been great to know because your title is always telling me so I can ask question around this, because in the industry in general there's so much. I think there's so much rapid thing happening within the 2 years. AI is taking the word. Previously Kubernetes take us by storm, then the advent of platform engineering, internal developer portal. Some newcomers who are might be listening to us, they overwhelmed by so much they need to grasp in order to advance their career in the IT these days. But first thing first, I would like to know like what is happening currently as of today on Harness. I know they have been developing some solution on IDP, developer portals, CI/CD has been very active in the Kubernetes space as well. But as of 7th February 2025, what is currently happening? What are the current customers' demand for the Harness, and what actually you see the trend going forward within the company?
There's always a lot going on. Our space moves pretty quickly. Kind of like Harness, our kind of our vision is coming true. We want it to be we want to be the destination for software engineering and the destination for software delivery. I remember this might be a little bit long-winded of an answer. When I first started 5 years ago, we only had one module. We were a continuous delivery solution. And so we were a CD first company. And so how you go about deploying was our forte. As time went on, we added more and more modules. We have over a dozen GA modules at this point. Like you actually mentioned a few of them in your introduction. And so we kind of focus on the developer, like very heavily investing in developer experience and DevSecOps right now. And so all of those non-fun things you have to do as an engineer, like, oh, you have an idea, you need to get that idea to production. Well, there's a lot of like production is the key word there. There's a lot of roadway, a lot of mileage between you and production. And so how do we go about reducing toil? And so we're very heavily investing. We've always been investing in AI since the start. We had actually product. I was one of the product managers on was continuous verification. So how do you know that the change you made is if any regression occurred? But kind of AI, this is my boil into a conversation of AI is that, well, AI is here if you like it or not in your day-to-day life, from your consumer life, you use ChatGPT or DeepSeek or whatever the flavor du jour is today to your engineering or professional life. It's there to help make your life easier. It's there to kind of unlock pieces of information you might not know you've had, and also help you make decisions based on if you're overwhelmed with data. How do you go about making a decision? For example, in observability, you could have infinite amount of data, traces and spans and logs. How do you go and discern that? And so kind of going back to your root question is that, we have several new modules. They've been around that kind of focus on AI. So we have a code assistant, a QA assistant, But even things that are problematic, for example, one of my favorite modules is that we have a database DevOps module. I'm sure we all had to roll a database change in before, and if you have to roll back, it's like such a pain. You have to deal with a DBA, all these schema changes or DDL changes. We have a module that actually will help a version, semantic version that for you, and overall, there's lots of great capabilities of harness.
Wonderful. And I think back in the days, I think they have some things around chaos engineering as well. That
Mm,
is quite
mm,
interesting space as well, because you need to understand if the things goes down in the production, how my application behave. I think these days it is a necessity to have those kind of capabilities as well. I am one of the huge supporter of these kind of capabilities, and Harness is providing those as well. And I
mm,
think like the next question is, these days what I'm actually seeing in the platform engineering space in journal, I think when the advent of these IDPs things coming started to resonating with the customers and the builder in itself, now we see the shift left kind of approach. And the shift led, what I try to see is like, you can give developers a developer workflow in
mhm,
there where they are, and then you give them by using a backstage, let's say, or some tools like crossplane or
mhm.
KRO from Azure and AWS. So
Yep.
can you tell us a little bit about, because this is a very fascinating space these days, because I work with the platform engineering working group within the CNCF, we see a
Yeah.
lot of these debates as well. So what is developer flow look like, and why you see people are, is it a right way to invest money or energy into the IDPs these days?
Background is in Java, right? Like distributed Java, like you write some pretty big systems in Java. I'm not a kernel engineer. Now, I've
Hmm.
been in the Kubernetes space since 2014. I'm using it for a while, so it's come a decade since I first experienced Kubernetes. And kind of what either love it or hate it, what's been happening in the market for the last 10 years, there's this rise of Netflix made this popular, right? Of being a full not a full stack, but like a kind of a one stop fits all engineer. If you write it, you run it, right? So, or if you build it, you operate it, right? And that type of development or that type of engineering mindset, it's pretty burdensome, right? So an engineer has to learn, a software engineer has to know so much. And we've shifted so much left. Now the counter argument there would be, well, you know what? We have infinite YAMLs. You want a networking stack? Here's an Istio YAML. You want storage? Here's a CSI driver configuration in another YAML. Oh, you want to do some sort of tracing at the kernel level? Here's an eBPF configuration. Like, let me write the feature. My job here is to write a calculator. I'm not oversimplifying it, right? Like, hey, you know what? I'm writing robbyscalculator.com. I don't need to know about how the kernel is acting, or I don't need to know about specific like nodes and taints and like very system specific distribution things. Just let it run. But with all of that knowledge that you have to do, how do you disseminate that? And like you mentioned, like shift left. Left as a developer, right's to operator, right? Well, how do you shift left? You're overwhelmed. Yes, I would be even today with all my experience, I could still be overwhelmed with there's a lot of stuff we have to learn. IDPs are so one I'll go back a couple more years. So like in the DevOps world, there was an acronym called CAM. So it's like cultural automation, measurement, and sharing. Puppet used to do a great, state of DevOps years and years ago, and they still do it. It kind of changed hands, but everybody was, there was a distribution of like elite and like just like laggards where everybody did a poor job, regardless if they were like I'm not mentioning names, but like if they're the biggest software company, a FANG company, or they're just a tiny little place was the S part, that everybody was bad in the sharing part. That means that we're not good at sharing information, right? Like there's always tribal information. How do we disseminate information? I'm a people manager here at Harness, so I'm lucky to lead a team here. And kind of one of my jobs is I have to onboard employees, right? When they actually have someone starting in a couple weeks. So I have to worry how to, or discern how to onboard a new engineer on my team. And so the IDPs are just for that, right? They're very, very specific to what do you need in your day-to-day job as a software engineer or as a developer? Like, hey, you know what? I need to write a service. Here's the Swagger documentation. Or like, hey, you know what? I have a couple of keys I need. Here are the keys. Or even more so, developer onboarding or service onboarding. Hey, you know what? It's there's not only the service, but there's non-functional requirements, authentication, authorization, journal security. Are you conformant to the enterprise's kind of enterprise standards. Are you documenting what you're writing? Is there a run book? Is there an operational guide if something goes down? Going back to this full life cycle. That's what I was searching for. Full life cycle developer. It took me a minute to come up with the term. What are your day to day and like week to week and horizon tasks that you have to do? And IDP can provide all of that. Like it's actually, if you first look at an IDP, you might say, hey, this is like a glorified Confluence, which it is, right? But it's providing you information all you need. Harness a specific rendition of our IDP, our internal developer portal, is based off of Backstage, right? So a very popular one because we can participate in a plugin ecosystem. But it does a lot more. There's a lot of automation, right? Like for example of we're starting to use more Backstage on my team, or pardon me, IDP on my team. We can start pulling in metrics, like hey, like these are like we run conformance tests once in a while. Hey, like these things failed. Yeah, we use it as a test dashboard, right? Also, and so really helps put all the information up front that you need to be successful from day one. And it seemed like an obvious thing to have, but only now it's like picking up. Like people were like, one more little bit. It used to be that in terms of like enterprise users, software engineers are viewed at the top, right? They're the sharpest folks. Like for an average consumer, like consumer-based applications, the user experience was never there for the developer, right? Like this whole notion of developer experience or DX, like similar as user experience, like how quickly can a developer do something? When you reduce friction there, you're freeing up their mental capacity to do other things and toil. Like instead of you wasting cycles figuring something out, the answer is right there. So big fan of it. Should have been there for a long time. It's only now it's taking like kind of mainstreamish right now, and I'm very happy for that. But the less toil, easier for all of us.
I ask Ravi that I need a calculator. So I don't need to understand what the hell Ravi is developing these kind of things as well. Like, is he using Istio, Grafana, Prometheus, OpenTelemetry? No, it's not our being a developer's job to learn all these different
Yeah.
kind of tooling. At the end of the day, we just need to spin up some resources, and then our job has to be done. And previously, I speak to some of the guests on this thing is like working in Kubernetes is similar to it is doing going for a Guinness Book of Record. Like you choose 26 different tool to just apply a calculator app for your
Yeah.
customer. That is not an ideal solution to begin with as well. And also, I think you hit a wonderful point as well because on the developer experience side, this is missing, and I think nobody is actually paying attention to the developer experience until quite recently when the Kubernetes and when the platform engineering become a big thing for us, and everybody start paying attention like, whoa, this is a mandatory for us to work with the having some developer experience. I think one of the reason why, and I can ask, I can go with this analogy, and I ask Ravi, is it a good way to think about as well? So usually when I work with I think Kubernetes is like having a garage attached to your car all the time. Let's say if your car is going to burst, your tire is going to burst, you go inside the garage, pick up a new tire, fix it up, your problem solved. Or if your radiator can some catch fire, now once again your garage is attached to your car. Go inside it, pick up a fire extinguisher, fix the issue, your job is done. But let's say if those is not happening all the time, it's just very few of the cases, and you are attaching and going with the garage all the time, and then you might think around, are you caring and carrying stuff you never need? That's what we see industry is shaping up toward as well. And I think that's where the IDP noise is coming up. You have some solution that you only need bake inside the IDP and have a developer experience to begin with as well. And I think it's good to news for me as well because I will work with Ravi as well to give us some our reviews on one of the stuff we are working on behind the scene as well. But let's move on to the next part as well. I think that's where we see a lot of challenges. Even though I recently did a workshop on one of telecom provider in my region,
Mhm.
and they recently moved into the Kubernetes. And as you know, telecom provider, you need to manage everything on-prem. You don't need to leverage to go into the public and private data center. So Ravi, if somebody listener is currently on on-prem Kubernetes, Do you have some solution or some capabilities you want to share with the audience? Because I see there are many of them who still using Kubernetes on-prem, and they are facing the same challenges that everybody is facing these days.
Like on-prem Kubernetes is like an extreme amount of trouble, especially if it's like an air gap network. So like telcos, like they like those they have varying levels of hardware requirements, right? That they might even run some of their hardware doesn't run Linux, right? They run their own proprietary like hardware and machine like operating system and whatnot. Going back to your garage analogy, take it even further. So for users who are unfamiliar with Kubernetes, Kubernetes is completely pluggable. If you don't like how Kubernetes does something, you can change it. Like this is a very old example. I don't like the networking interface, Calico. Let me install Flannel. What is that? Like why do I? You can change the opinion on Kubernetes. Anything but etcd is up for grabs, right? You can change pretty much anything in KH, right? And so going back to your tire, oh, do I put a square tire? Do I use a Michelin tire? Do I use like a Pirelli tire? Don't even change the tire? Just leave the thing on the brakes, let it roll around, right? Like these these are decisions you have to make like all the time. And going back to Kubernetes, like it changes all the time. The opinion changes all the time. And so I'm gonna kind of box it in that like it's an air gap network, or it's like, hey, an air gap K8s, things change, like it's designed it was designed to be the appliance or application infrastructure of the internet for a reason, because like all the dependencies you need will change, and it's a distributed system, so it uses TCP and whatnot to kind of communicate between the nodes. Like it's designed to be on a network, right? Like that's what it's designed to be on. And so if it's not, it gets to be a little bit challenging. But there are very many use cases of that. Actually, I use this, kind of a precursor to Kubernetes. I used to work for Mesosphere or D2IQ, and they had a competing orchestrator called DCOS, which is Apache Mesos and Apache Marathon. Actually, Amazon ECS is based off of Apache Mesos, right? And so, like, it's another. It lost the orchestrator game. Swarm, Mesos, Kubernetes won, right? Like, it was just more ubiquitous. A lot of their use cases were actually offline use cases, because like it was just a pure orchestrator. That's all it did. It was orchestrate, right? And as a resource manager, versus you get a lot more functionality than a resource manager in Kubernetes. It is a challenge, but there's one use case that always comes to mind. In the United States here, there's a fast food restaurant. Actually, I live in Atlanta. It's called Chick-fil-A. They have a KH cluster in like every restaurant. They have thousands of points of presence. So technically, they were at one point the largest number of points of presence of K8s. Like they had more unique K8s instances on like GCP. They're like, oh, GCP has certain regions. Well, we have stores in like dozens of states and different countries now, and each one of them is running a small K8s cluster in the store. In case anything goes offline. And so it is, I gave you a long-winded answer there. It's quite challenging to run, kind of like a disconnected K8s. It needs the internet, but it is possible. Like, what the gains I'm sure your telco provider is going through is like, hey, it's like our vendors are giving us YAML files now. We don't get an EXE or DMG or RPM or AMI or zip or tar to install, like our next set of software that they're buying. Like our vendor gave us an image file and a YAML. And so how do we install that? Well, you need Kubernetes to install it. And so that's kind of push and pull, right, where industry's going. So it's a distribution thing. They're forced to kind of use it. But long-winded answer. I don't know if that was the answer you're looking for, but that's kind of like my take on what's going on.
Really, really helpful, well. I think listener hearing about these things, because I think this is a bigger elephant, managing on-prem Kubernetes, and telecom are moving into this area because of some of the feature they requested. Some of their customer, or might be they think there's a feasible option for us, but now the challenge become like this thing: do we train existing employees on the new set of skills, or hiring a new full-fledged team for the Kubernetes engineer, or our company pay for their expenses, because they might be very expensive for our team. The salary
Mhm.
is quite expensive to work with. And then there is also, like, if we go for the management solution for the Kubernetes, and now we're using on-prem, and some managed provider manage for us, and we don't need to take care about it. These are the very critical angle that everybody, I think, facing these days as well. I think this is a very good in the debate as well. And I think, like, as you mentioned during the debate as well, I think there's so many opinionated approaches inside the Kubernetes. Now more are also developing. Like we see another thing versus container, that is WASM, WebAssembly module, is shaping up quite recently, quite nicely, because right now I think WASM Cloud is a incubation project within the CNCF. So that's where we see more and more opinionated approaches have been emerging. So I think it's been great sometime, and sometime is sad. So much stuff to learn as well. And also on the other orchestration news, I think quite recently learned from the Mirantes, who's actually supporting Docker Swarm for many years behind the scene for few
Yeah.
of their customers. Now I read the last yesterday some blog from CEO of Portrainer, and he mentioned that the Mirantes is now discarding Swarm from the latest version of their Kubernetes engine. Sad news for me, to be honest, because I am a very huge fan of Swarm back in the days. It's very easy. I just hit command Docker Swarm init. Oh my god, I have 3 clusters.
When K8s came out, like for example, a common party trick we would do, we would like go into a running container and like kill it, like kill the process, and look at how long it takes Swarm versus Kubernetes to like pick up that the pod is no longer there, or the container. Sorry, the container. I'll use container. The container wasn't there, and Swarm was like twice as fast. Like it used to be like a 60-second interval, like, oh, like a minute will go by, like, okay, fine, like, oh yeah, we lost communication, blah blah. The Swarm was, it was like that. It's a second it stops. And same thing with D2 or Marathon or Mesos was pretty fast. And so yeah, it was they were very, very good at resource management and certain things. But because of how big the ecosystem got, or like, hey, you know what, you can define any resource. It was a little bit more developer focused in Kubernetes, right? Like, hey, you can define a custom resource in this way, and similar to we have primitives. So, and that's what took off, right? And like after that, the floodgates were open, and having a common language to kind of describe very operational tasks. Okay, or Kubernetes won after that. But yeah, you're right. Like there's this, there was precursors to that. There was Swarm, there was Borg, there were, Microsoft has Apollo, which you never talk about, like how they manage resources in Azure, right? And so container orchestration has been around for a little while. So it's not quite a new thing.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. I think I seeing like Mirantes, even though there are few customers, they're still supporting it, and we see like, oh my God, we have still a solution available if we don't have a fancy orchestration needed, something like Kubernetes. We have a lightweight as well. But I think the reason why the Swarm is getting away from the conversation, the tools like K3s or Micro K8s or K0s, they make Kubernetes installation very easy for the developers to work with. But still, as you mentioned, there's a gigantic ecosystem. But Swarm is just focused on the developers' need. A very small or medium or a very small enterprises who just need application orchestration engine. That's work. But it's sad for me because Mirantes is now in 4.0 is declining its support for Swarm. I think rightly so, because none of the things today work with Swarm. They don't have a
Yeah.
CSI, CNI, ingress controller, blah blah blah. That's missing.
I haven't heard of
I
Swarm in
think.
like years, so it's just like I thought it was gone. Yeah, it's funny you bring that up. Like I remember trying to, and like before Kelsey Hightower did Kubernetes the hard way. I remember when I was at Red Hat, we were trying to install, like I was at Red Hat when OpenShift came out, and then when they were moving to Kubernetes, this is like 2015, 2014. And we had to kind of install Kubernetes on our own before we could install OpenShift. And I was like, this is the hardest thing I've ever, like, I can't do it. Like, this is, like I couldn't do it on my laptop. I need to spin up like a different, like basically a different VM that like to have that node master, that admin node to like worker node type of relationship. Now, like K3D, like one command, minikube, start, boom, like it just comes up. So you're right. Like the experience has gotten a lot easier. The complexity kind of moved around, but it is much easier for you to get a cluster. Like it's not special. If we install one cluster at, my entire team at Red Hat in like a year, it was a big deal. Like, oh, we're like Google also. Look at this, like, oh, now Kelsey writes the blog. Okay, it's the hard way, like, oh, thank you. This gives us all like 200 steps to install this. do a subnet like this, a networking space like that, get us a piece of storage, spin up etcd, make sure Zookeeper's not running because it will collide with etcd, like stuff like that, right? And like, yeah, that it's gotten easy, like in a good way.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. I think like I started my orchestration learning from the Docker Swarm, and then I move into the
Mm,
Kubernetes.
yeah.
That's why I've kind of very attached to the Swarm thing as well. But it's sad to see. I want it to be still with us, even though we're still not actually using it in behind the scene. Compared to the Kubernetes, is just a he won the orchestration war. That's no doubt about it. It's nothing other than Kubernetes. And I think it's rightfully so. You have even in the cloud provider, they are supporting it as well. But the last few conversation I want to do, because you are using Backstage behind the scene as well. And
Mm.
Backstage have once again the similar relationship with Kubernetes, love and hate. And Backstage is the same thing, love and hate relationship with the community, with the customers, and all these kind of stuff as well. Even though I see the Red Hat is are working on providing some dynamic plugins for the Backstage that I see quite recently coming up. But Ravi, you will be working on this thing for a long time. Tell us, like, what's your key area of focus within the Backstage in itself, and how is your company's? Is there any plugins that Harness recently contributed to the Backstage? What those are, and how your customer can use those plugins?
Yeah, I think for us, like, like if we look at like the history of Backstage, it's like it came from Spotify. They did the same thing that Netflix did with their OSS, like Hysterex and the Chaos Monkey and whatnot. Like when they kind of gave that, and also like Spinnaker, right? Like they had a whole bunch of tools that they kind of open sourced, and they did it for a business reason. Like by open sourcing it, that they're getting more contributions than their own engineers. Spotify, if from a software engineering perspective, I know it's a long-winded answer. Like my take is Spotify, they have a very excellent engineering culture. Their tribe and guild model, it is what teams, like they were addressing like, hey, people change roles, right? Like usually it's like, oh, you change a team, you're fired. Or, oh, like how dare you change teams? Like it's kind of a faux pas, right? But in our industry, like you need to change teams to kind of, to grow your skill set, and totally understandable. So Spotify like did that internally, and they said, oh, well, onboarding is a problem. They came up with a kind of a, the backstage, right, of a show, right, or a musician, the green room, that they kind of did that in their tooling. So they made it open. Where we're doing with Harness with that, it's like, well, we are a backstage implementation. In terms of what it is, like a lot of what we're building is actually integrations into our platform. So like, how do you get data out? Like, for example, like, well, how do you get DORA metrics out? How do you make a catalog, or how do you tag certain things? We're basically making it easy for people like the citizen platform engineer to kind of build on. And also because like, unlike Backstage, Harness is an engine. Harness can implement the change. For example, you're not going to do a deployment through Backstage. You're going to connect to like an Argo. You need it's a facade. It's a front, right? Like Backstage itself is not an engine to enact change. Harness. That's our like ultimate, like our ace card. Like Harness can actually do the change that you require. And so a lot of the integration is like self-contained in our ecosystem, right? Saying, hey, you know what, like because you're using Harness internal developer portal, it's very easy to integrate to Harness continuous delivery, which we have. Like you can use. We have a GetOps engine. We have a non-GetOps engine. You can pick and choose. You can kind of aggregate those pieces. I know we do contribute back. I don't have the stats. I can look up the. I hope to forget the CNCF has that contributor dashboard, or that like dev stats. Yeah, that's what it's called. So I'm sure you'll see our name in there a few times for that. But I don't have it with me right now.
Yes, absolutely. I think as you mentioned, like I think the Backstage once again having some, because some people feel like we need developers workflow, and Backstage is missing the developer workflow, but it's give you the Jenkins style extensibility back in the days. Like when the Jenkins pop up, you need a build automation tool, or you can pick it from the library, stitch in your application, booms, your CI/CD now work with it as well. But now people say, oh, no, we miss some developer workflow. Like now developer need to deal with so many things. Like they write code, they build an image, put images into the registry, pull it back, create some pipeline, store they need, CNI storage, blah blah blah. Now we're pushing everything for the DevOps team, and they are having the same problem that the developer has. They'll need to learn everything. Now the industry mover, why not we give a developer workflow in front of the developer with whatever tool they want, and backstage kind of introduces this kind of capability. But then there's a noise around. They do not have some good developers workflow. But I still feel like, because backstage is a CNCF sandbox, I think incubated or graduated project within the CNCF umbrella.
Yep.
So I tend to see like more and more companies contributing into it compared to the other IDP solution exists
I think
today. So
I
I
think what's
kind of
also
tend to see like,
Oh yeah, I think also what's kind of like missing in the, and this is not a critique on like, like, because like if you look at like the ecosystem, if you and I were to make a particular CNCF project, let's say, we made our new, I'll call it like flamingo or hibiscus. I have all these like funny names for like projects I like to make. It's very technical, right? Like it's like bits and pieces of like very technical functionality. A lot of times what's missing in, very technical projects is process, right? Like, hey, we're giving you all the building blocks, but like you need to build the house. Here's all the Lego pieces. I gave you a door piece. Why don't you like put it upside down? You put it side by side. What do you do with this door piece or a wheel? Do you spin it? What happens? And that's process, right? Like how do you kind of shape process? A good example would be, let's say, incident response. For an IDP, let's say you're my manager, right? Let's say I work for you, right? So like you and I work for, a big telco provider, say in Pakistan, right? And so like um and we have an incident. Well, where in this IDP is going to tell me what to do when we have a breach or an incident or an outage, right? Like this IDP was, the steps were prescribed by a platform engineering team, and they kind of put the steps together, but maybe they haven't foreseen an incident, like an outage or something like that. Like, oh, like, and you're like, Ravi, like none of our, like no one can make a phone call. That's a problem, right? Like people need to use their phone, but with a telco provider. And so like how do you deal with that, right? And that's where harness is getting into more and more now. Like for example, we have a new incident response module that we have. And so like, hey, like if something did happen, like, what, is there some sort of like kind of playbook you need to run? Is there like people you need to call? Is there like like a Slack channel that needs to be created? Is there like tickets that need to be orchestrated? Like all these particular things. I mean, we have incidents here. Like we actually do it really well. Once or twice, like software stops working, and I get those alerts that we have. Like, but that type of like process, like since we do it at scale, like we're introducing into like different modules. We have a new incident response module that we have that's kind of coming out, and then that can help tie into the IDP also. And so I think that's kind of like the missing pieces, right? Like, hey, like we have the
yes.
building, like the Legos, but like we're helping the companies to make the house and the home and the office building and the warehouse with those Legos, right? And so that's kind of I see like where we're pushing into this year, big time.
Yes, absolutely. I totally agree with you, because I think these things like platform things, they should be the commercial one, because the open source version always have this half solution for you. And then you need to make solution like, oh, I can go with the half solution, and then I need an engineering team to build up extensibility
Mhm.
on top of it. Not all the organization has the leverage to do it. Their
Yeah,
customer queue is so much large. If they internally build something, this requires a lot of investment, energy, and I think that's not a viable solution for them. And sometimes the commercial solution is works well for them, because they already have customers. They see their pain points are, and then the commercial off the shelf solution providing all those capabilities. At the end of the day, they need to relax. They need more time to have it for their team and others, because as engineer we love to build stuff.
yeah,
That's not a
yeah,
problem. We
yeah.
love to build stuff,
Oh yeah,
but the problem
yeah,
is that is we having a limited amount of time. Either
yeah,
we solve the customer problem, or we can build up something fancy for us that we love about it. But I think it's important to solve the customer problem first, because that is what we actually meant for as well. Just a last question, because I think
sure.
that is necessary. Without having an AI conversation these days, nobody
Mhm.
lied to listen, and it feel like a boring
Yeah.
unfortunately. And we need to keep it into our own space, that is DevOps, Kubernetes, cloud native space. Is there
Yeah.
any recent things you have been seeing that AI and Kubernetes becoming a close relationship, or a far relationship? Is there any customer you are having today are looking for solution that they can use AI kind of workload, but they run on side of the Kubernetes, and what their challenges are? And you are the best person to give us some insight into this question.
Like kind of a duality. It's like you mentioned, like there's workload versus like operations. And so like kind of from a workload perspective, like ML ops has been around for a little while, right?
Yes.
Like if you need to run like these like LLMs, or you need to, not at massive scale. Like you can run K8s via GPU, right? Like you can pin, a node to a specific like piece of infrastructure that's running a GPU, and you can submit K8s tasks and jobs to it and run, kind of like workload type of task, or like LLM type of tasks that are out there. And so that's there, right? Like using K8s as a pure orchestrator of these workloads, and that's getting more and more popular. Like I don't know how OpenAI does their processing, but I'm sure there's K8s involved. Like it has to be, like it's there somewhere at some point, right? Like you're not going to escape it these days. And that's there. I think where a lot of the a lot that's more of like data engineering, data scientists, machine learning type of workloads that are there. And so that's been there for a while. I think because of the big consumerization of AI, like your AI is talking back to you now, like, oh, like what is it? Do I have to dress with a coat today in, like Lahore, right? Is it going to rain outside? What should I wear today? Like stuff like that, like you're kind of interacting with. Um, that's more the operation side of Kate's now. Like what we're seeing is like, oh, like, hey, the operator model, like people change teams, like something goes wrong in the cluster, like you want to talk to somebody, and somebody's using the engineer, like, hey, Ravi, like workload stop, go fix it. Like, what? Reboot the pod? It's not coming up. I don't know what's going on. Or we have an incident, like, we have like a like something chaos caught, like, unforeseen problem has occurred. And AI is really, really good with that, right? Like it can kind of discern and chop a lot of data up for you, saying, hey, like we witnessed a slowdown. Where's the slowdown occurring, or why is it occurring? Say, oh, like, I ingested all of your trace data, and it looks like between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. there was a large amount of traffic on one of these services. And you're like, oh, I know what, we have like a backup job that runs, at this time. No wonder it stopped working, or stuff like that. So we're seeing a lot of demand for that, even more so like helping day to day. I know we like to teach a little bit. You and I talked before the podcast, right? And we had actually a good talk track like during before that. And it's kind of goes back to trust in the machine, right? I think more and more people are trusting the machine. So, for example, I'll just date myself. In 2017, we bought a new car, and it had like an autopilot feature, right? And like I was like, I don't trust it, like I don't know what it's gonna do. So I remember the first time I turned it on, I was on the highway, and here like the highways are straight and have like good lane markers, but I took my hand off the wheel, which like I've never done in my years of driving the car. Like I'm like, okay, what is it gonna do? And it kind of, it was adjusting itself, then it'll beep at you to put your hand back on the wheel. But it took a lot of trust, right? And also with that trust, I don't have any children, but like if like, hey, I wouldn't give my kids this car, because it took me like I had to agree what the machine was doing. Like I had to agree with the car and like veer off into like another car. That's kind of what we're seeing now. Like people have gotten over that initial like hump. Like, oh, like you think of the Terminator movie, the machines are all coming down and they're gonna, like wipe out humanity. The joke is Skynet was written in Java. They have to restart every day, so you have about 24 hours before they do take over. Then they'll just stop. So that's a joke I like to tell people. Um, People are trying to trust it more, but like also it takes like experience, right? Like that's the part that's missing. You have to agree with what the AI is doing, and then once you start trusting it, like I know I'm a fan of Reddit, like this is a long-winded answer. I definitely read the threads, like on there, and Hacker News and whatnot, like big orange angry website, whatnot. And like, oh, like why do I even go to school for this? Like ChatGPT will just like spit out code like that. But you have to agree with it, right? Like you have to use your experience. Like, is that right? Is that scaffolding code? I do use an AI bot once in a while. Like I had to write a POC for something. Like, oh, like Prometheus wasn't exporting the right way. So I'm like, hey, give me an example of Spring Boot Prometheus exporting this metric. And it gave me like the one liner. I'm like, aha, there's a configuration I need to put in my Spring Boot application. But it took experience to kind of know that. And so I know it probably wasn't the glorified answer that you're saying, but change is slow. People are agreeing more and more with that. It's becoming more mainstream. Is it going to take everybody's job? No. Like is it going to kind of fine tune your skills? Yes, in that way. So that's my take as of today. It can change, 6.
Definitely. I think, like, as you mentioned, like, I think currently, if you look at the AI, it's very good at giving you some boilerplate code. During our time, we need to scratch the surface all the time. Use AI for that boilerplate thing. And it can actually boost up your delivery in the some workflow engine as well. And I think some companies are building solution currently on AI. AI is expensive thing. You like expensive machinery to
Yeah.
begin and work with. Not everyone has these unlimited pocket, unlimited money. Also, I don't think so. Everywhere in the world, there are skilled engineer available for the AI. We have limited people to work with.
Mhm.
So I think it's a very important, as the conversation you had, similar conversation should be in the table within the company if they want to build a solution, or if somebody need to incorporate AI, they need to have all these conversation in place. What my worry is that everybody picking up a fashion of AI and picking up, and someone is actually dealing with so much bills in the cloud, and at the end of the day, this solution is very small, is not generating enough value for the company to survive with. So I think it's need a very clear and concise picture to begin with. Otherwise, there are uncertainties has to come up. And I can see, like, if you use AI with Kubernetes type of workload, this can help you in some capacity, because Kubernetes is a machinery that can scale up, scale down, and we have so many tools like this. And you'd make sure that your resources are not stay ideal. They need to do something. Like we are doing something in the company.
Yeah.
Why not our workload or stay ideal and doing nothing, and when we're giving some money back to the cloud provider and they make happy, like, whoa, good. Still use Kubernetes in the cloud and still paying us a lot of money. But good, Ravi. Always play to talk to you as well. And next, in the near future, definitely pick up some more brain with you, and we can host some
Sure.
panel talk with other people, because your knowledge and expertise area is been great. And always play to talking to people who have some customer type of experience. They have some work with the extensive knowledge, and always it's been great for the listener as well, because a lot of the companies I happen to work with, they recently moved into the Kubernetes, and the challenges we have been facing with the last 6 years, now they are facing it, and they're looking for some solution. I would believe the harness has been one of the good solution. I have been watching this space for a very long time, and harness has been moved from, as you mentioned, for the 2 3 module to a gigantic DevOps software
Mhm.
delivery and AI catalog these days. There is so much on the website. You can go into the harness.io, and you have all the information available. They have recently added, I think, incident management as well, database,
Yeah.
DevOps,
Incident response.
artifact registry. Yes,
Yeah.
and one other thing is that cloud development environment that I love most these days. I think this is I've seen a lot of the companies are looking forward to these kind of solution, because this. But I looking at the website, I need few 3 4 more hours to work through all of this thing, because this is gigantic. There is so much stuff in here as well. But I try to ask only one question from the website, is that I think there's some summit is happening quite recently, just 5 days from now, the Feature Management and Experimentation Summit. I
Oh,
think it's
flagship.
called Flagship by Harness.
Yeah.
And Ravi, will you be there where it's happening?
It's a virtual conference, and so yeah, like definitely if you're able to kind of attend. We've we going back to the whole like developer ecosystem, we invested very heavily into feature flags, so progressive delivery,
Mm,
and this is kind of a culmination of that. We actually had Chaos Carnival not too long ago, so
yes.
similar, like like we our CNCF relationship with Litmus Chaos. It's
Mm,
yeah, we always like to give back and kind of bring people together. There's so many of these engineering areas. Like I'm surprised. We used to have only one. I was here before we had any conference. Then we started unscripted. Now we have Chaos Carnival and we have Flagship. And yeah, there's a lot of great stuff coming out this year from us.
if this is virtual, anybody can participate, register in, and see some of the conversation happening in that front as well. And also on the website, or right after
Mhm.
I'm disconnected from here, I will be
Mhm.
reading a report, the state of software delivery 2025. That's
Mhm.
also available on the Harness website. So this is my to-do list for the next 2 days as well. I think I can see there's a very good information available to grasp as well. But
Yeah,
Ravi, thank you very much. I think
check out the report because it talks about AI actually. It talks about like so they
yes.
actually interviewed a lot of folks about like how they feel about AI, like is it helping you, is it not helping you? And
Mm.
it's actually like it kind of it paints a very humanistic picture. Like we're human. Like we don't if something's unknown, it's like the first person to sail in a boat. Are they going to come back? I don't know. Like first person to do that. People are going. A lot of these like we're at this pinnacle point that now it's getting more mainstream. It's a lot of people's like first experience with AI. Like oh now my job requires it. Like let's see. And it's in the report to kind of talk about that. Like hey like people have to correct the AI or like hey like X number of people like X number of cases out of N number or like corrected by another engineer. So yeah, pick up the report. It's very very insightful.
I think speaking of, there's so much information here, but definitely, Ravi, I might keep you busy this year with
Sure.
some of the podcast thing as well, because you have a wonderful knowledge that I definitely need these days. Everybody need these days as well. So thank you very much for your wonderful conversation with us on these days. And as you move into the Kubernetes, you will see the complexity overheard. You will see the frustration of Kubernetes adoption. Unclear ownership is one of the problem. Lack of standardization, security concern, cluster sprawl, our provisioning resources, lack of visibility, and inefficient workload. And that is what everybody these days facing challenges with. And if you're looking for the solution, Harness might be the one that can actually relax you, and you can spend more time with friend and family rather than Kubernetes. So go check that out as well. Thank you very much for listening to this episode. Hope to meet you again in the near future with another guest. Stay safe, stay healthy. Bye bye, everyone, and have a wonderful day.